First things first, I want to clarify that I think the term woke is cringy and I fucking hate using it. I've only ever heard it appropriated by the right to describe everything from social justice warriors to Antifa to communism. Yet, at its core, it is a useful term to describe something very particular because there's this fine line between a genuinely important social justice movement and academic fluff that was made up to sell you a course or a degree. With many young artists now choosing to take the academic route, doing their bachelor's in fine art, their master's in fine art, I think it's important to recognize the flaws in the ideology and its effects on the art world. I think the potential of artists is being held back by people's obsession with wokeness and by extension postmodernism. And through dismantling these structures, we can lay out the potential beauty of a post-woke art world. Before I get started, this channel just kind of like had a mini blow up. I'm up to 1,000, well actually it's like 1,400 subscribers as I film this, but I just hit 1,000 a couple days ago. I have a ton of plans for this channel, so if you want to support me, you know, like, subscribe, check out the Patreon. That's where you're gonna get Discord access. I want to build a community of like uneducated fucking art morons. If you don't like this video, then don't like it. Don't subscribe. Be honest with yourself. I don't give a fuck. I love you. When you try to find the core principle of postmodernism, you find like a myriad of different answers. It's everything from that every structure is based off of power, to the fact that postmodernism is an absence of modernism. The elusiveness of a core principle is the core principle of postmodernism. Because it answers to no higher power, it has to justify its own existence. Nothing justifies its existence. Therefore, nothing is tangible about it, nothing is real about it. It's all theoretical, it's all psychic. It justifies its own existence by adopting ideas that favor previous ideas in the postmodern canon. If that's hard to picture and wrap your head around, it's because it's fucking retarded. Allow me to lay it out in a nice little chart. You can really grasp it. If the core principle of postmodernism is that there is no truth, then from that, we can posit that beauty standards don't exist. Because beauty standards are hierarchical, we can posit that hierarchy doesn't exist. Because marriage is hierarchical and requires truth to exist, from there, we can dissect marriage as an idea with rigid gender roles. Gender roles being inherently hierarchical means they also are non-existent, in connection to everything we've discussed so far. We can follow this line of thinking to the concept of masculinity, and masculinity's relationship to capitalism, capitalism's relationship to growth, and the chart itself also isn't hierarchical because we can start at any point and wind up at any other point, like a rhizome. And furthermore, the chart can grow indefinitely as long as we keep dismantling structures in relation to structures we've already dismantled. That's what I mean when I say that postmodernism has to justify its own existence. However, if at any point we stop, we pick a stopping point and we say this structure does exist, growth for example, then the process I just explained goes in reverse by justifying previous structures to the point where postmodernism can no longer exist. With that in mind, it's important to note that most universities are decades into this line of thinking. Like, postmodernism is still the predominant thought in any liberal arts class. These ideas, postmodernism, and then by extension wokeness, they can only grow. They can't shrink. I think to further understand that, I really suggest reading Curtis Yarvin's brief explanation on his idea of the cathedral. He really clearly outlines the way this process works in far more detail than I could, so I'll link that below. With this in mind, I think it's best to think of wokeness as an exact parallel and extension of postmodernism, in that it operates the same way by continually finding more and more specific intersections of different disparities. Just like postmodernism, if you stop expanding the parameters of what is politically correct, then everything falls apart. Because if one group states that an idea has gone too far, then it dismantles another group's beliefs. I'm starting to sound a little right populist, okay? But here's the thing. The right is just as, if not more responsible for the proliferation of these ideas than the left is. In my video on Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, I quote Mark in saying that a counter-movement has to propose a true alternative. It can't just be an anti-movement. And that's where the culture war comes from. You have people who are anti-woke, people who are pro-woke. All they care about is dismantling each other. Basically, I want you to consider the right as just as responsible as the left for the endless continuation of this rhetoric. Look at figures like Ben Shapiro, or more recently like Andrew Tate and Sneeko, who this is all they talk about. All they talk about is like SJWs and shit. It's like, they're just as responsible. They don't propose an alternative. They're just like, these dumb fucking SJWs, these dumb bitches don't fucking understand. This is why, in the beginning and in the title of the video, I use the term post-woke. What is post-woke? It's an alternative, it's a path forward. Moves beyond the endless postmodern rhetoric, while also considering the genuine struggles that different groups of people have experienced. Now I know what you're saying. After that explanation, we dismantled it. I'm the first person ever to dismantle postmodernism in such a logical way that no one can disagree with me. But how does that apply to the art world? The issue with wokeness in art is twofold. The first issue is obvious, right? Art is language. There is no clear distinction between the purpose of language and the purpose of art. In that sense, there's also no distinction between policing of language and policing of art. The second issue is that wokeness creates a hierarchy of what should be represented in art. Art, which is in conversation with issues like sexuality or gender or race, will always be seen as more valid than art which discusses less topical social issues like class struggle or the impending doom of AI. These biases really undermine artists who could potentially push the field forward. It just seems like it doesn't matter when you have galleries that are mostly focused on queer and racial representation as some sort of guilt-driven damage control. Now, so far, we've done a good job of diagnosing the problem, but a diagnosis without a solution might as well just be like a terminal illness. So, post-woke. How do we construct a post-woke art world? I think the best way to do this would be to detach art from the source of this rhetoric. Academia and major galleries are far too entrenched in their own dogma to see change from within. These places no longer create change. They no longer push culture forward. Now universities just react to change the same way a advertisement company does. And to detach, it sounds pretty utopian, but it's not utopian. It can actually happen on the individual level. You, the viewer, watching this right now, in your own practice, untethering it from these paradigms. I think secondly, an important change would be to take pride in your lived experience. Your lived, authentic experience. Don't create things based on what is expected of you because of your identity. If racial or gender issues are something that are important to you, genuinely, then you should talk about them. But if they aren't important to you, then you shouldn't feel a need to discuss them. And something I saw a lot in my undergrad was mostly white professors trying to shoehorn racial narratives into art made by Black and Indigenous students, as if it's their moral duty to represent their own struggles. We hold more power than we ever have to communicate ideas to each other. We no longer need gallery exposure or representation. None of what the art world has become is set in stone. Neoliberalism leads us to believe everything is concrete, that everything has always existed the way it is now and always will. But these structures just fall apart if you stop believing in them. If you stop believing in the power of a degree, if you stop believing in the power of a fucking gallery, then they don't have power. They're not part of this endless great chain of being. They're just things that popped up in the last like 80 years that could just go away just as easily. It's up to you, watching this, to make that decision, to not go to school for art, to just make art on your own, to put it on the internet, to share with your peers, to push things forward naturally. Good art will always stand on its own. It can be done. In spite of all of this, it's important to remember that class war is the only war.